everybody. Thank you for coming to see me and me only tonight. Welcome to the world premiere of How to Train Your Dragon. It just feels like the first time, doesn't it? What a good movie. Well, I thought, because you saw this great movie for the very first time, that we would bring out the person that was really in charge of making this movie a great movie. He trained with actual dragons. He knows all about them. Ladies and gentlemen, writer, director, Chris Sanders. Don't clap for me, clap for him. Like the Beatles here, man, it's great. I've always wanted to ask you this because I love this movie so much, and this was a real turning point for DreamWorks. In the way you attracted talent, the way that you were telling stories, How to Train Your Dragon. I judge a lot about a movie being great is that, can I watch it today and it still holds up, and this one obviously totally still holds up. At the time, did you know that you were like, I got one of the greatest animated films of all time, like I'm about to make and direct. What was that mindset during then?
No, it all came together, piece by piece. This for me was my crash course in CG, because I came over to DreamWorks and I started work on The Croods. And that was going to be my very first CG film. So we were in the very beginning of that whole thing. We were building the characters, and I was just like figuring out how all that stuff happens, and just how you start one of these things as far as like how many assets you have to build and stuff. And then we were outlining on that for around a year. It took a long time because you want to do that. That's spend more time in the outline, and then you'll have less time and less trouble later on. They approached me, Bill Damaski approached me and said, can you come to my office and talk to me? And I thought I was being fired. Because when I got there, I was like, oh my God, like what's going on? Like nothing seemed wrong. But we had been in an outline for a year, so maybe they were like tired of it. And I got to his office and he said, so, how are things going? And I was like, oh my God, I am getting fired. That's how it starts. But then he said we were curious about, we were gonna make a change in directing on How to Train Your Dragon. And I had seen really just barely anything. There was a few drawings hung in the hall. I knew very little about it, but I don't know, I just immediately had a vibe that I wanted to do it, which is unusual. I'm not really that impetuous about something, but I actually said right then, I said, I think I want to do this. And he said, well, don't answer yet. Here, and he gave me a DVD that had the current story reel on it, and then he handed me the book, and he said, take a look at both of these things. And I looked at both of them, and I saw some things that needed to be done story-wise. So I immediately called Dean, who I had worked with on, I met him on Mulan, and co-wrote and co-directed with him on Lilo and Stitch. And I called him, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm not doing anything right now. And I said, do you want to work on a movie? And he goes, yeah, because I'm free. And I said, well, come over and see this thing, because he's so good at dialogue, especially with like teenage characters and stuff like that. I love his dialogue, I love his structural sense, his good structure and stuff. So yeah, so he came over and we immediately dove in. And I'm just gonna hijack your question and keep talking, is that okay? Because I had worked on Lion King, Beauty and the Beast. I worked a little bit on Aladdin. And usually there comes a point in these productions where you stop and go, hold on, what are we doing? And we'll stop in production for a few weeks and take a look at the story and just make sure, is this really what we're wanting to do? Because you can drift into these sort of zones where you get a little stuck. So Jeffrey Katzenberg sat down with us for lunch, and he said, and I tell you that so you understand what he said. He said, as you know, we make these films about 3 times, but you two only have enough time to make it once. So you've got to get it right. So there was a lot of pressure to not screw around and experiment with things. And that taught me a lot, because we got very serious about the structure. So the very first thing we did was we just broke the whole thing down to its structure, and we ignored the specifics and just looked at the structure that was running underneath the whole thing as a way to just start building it back up from the ground up as quickly as possible.
So when you get this job, do you get really like method actor about it, and you're like, I'm gonna go read Game of Thrones to really get a real mindset? I mean, how do you create a dragon that also feels a little cuddly that you want to hang out with, but also still needs to be kind of a little bit of a vicious creature? Like, how many times do you get those different iterations of what they look like?
So the redesign of the dragon was really one of the most critical things we did. If you've read the book, the dragon in the book is on screen, but it's not toothless, the toothless that we have on screen. So when we came onto the film, they had built and already the toothless. It's the little dragon. It's the little dragons that bother them when they're trying to have some dinner alone on the beach. The little we call them the terrible terrors. Those are toothless from the book. So he was only about 3 feet or so long. So you'll see one of the things that we had to do was like, if Hiccup is going to befriend a dragon and that's a big no-no, then you want it to be the worst choice you could possibly make in befriending a dragon. So we did a quick conceptual redesign of Toothless, and I had very strong feelings that he'd feel really compact. I think I referred to him as like he should look like a little Corvette. Like he's got a nice design and real sturdy looking. We didn't want him to get too big and too wispy. Because some of the other dragons have this sort of a wispy quality, which are beautiful, but I wanted him to feel really sturdy. And then of course, we were like, what color should he be? And I said, well, if he flies at night, I had already named him a Night Fury. I dubbed him a Night Fury in the script. I thought, well, if he flies at night, he should be like a stealth fighter. So we were like, oh, and so Tina and I were like, let's make him black. And the look on the lighters' faces told us that they're like, well, you won't be able to see him. We're like, I know, that's gonna be so cool. And they're like, no, you won't see him. He has to be gray. He can be a really, really dark gray with a mottled sort of thing. It'll play as black. But you'll see him on screen. Yeah.
Is he technically charcoal? Like
he is. He's like a 90% gray with some darker sections. Yeah.
I remember when I hear the movie when we're backstage, I can recall watching it for the first time. I don't know if you guys were brought back. I was a young wee lad when this came out, and I remember Hiccup losing his leg at the end and how impactful and like one of the general. It's going to sound really weird. One of the biggest twists I had seen in an animated movie. Probably in any movie, probably since Sixth Sense, when he was dead the whole time. I was like, oh, foreshadowing, he's gonna lose his leg. And it was done so tastefully, gracefully, and it was like a lesson in diversity and equity and inclusion before it became like the buzzwords that people use that sometimes they don't use correctly. But can you talk about that scene and getting that scene right? Because I mentioned there's like the R-rated version that Chris Sanders has that like really shows some stuff, or there's just like we knew how you wanted that to go from the jump.
Yeah, it's a tribute to the process. They always say trust the process, and if you surround yourself with really smart people, good things happen. That whole thing was really triggered by Jeffrey Katzenberg because we had an ending where Toothless did his thing and he rescued Hiccup and saved the day. And we were having a story meeting, a recap after one of our screenings, and Jeffrey said, "I just feel like it wraps up way too neatly. It's too pristine. It's too neat. I don't feel like I don't feel like there were stakes going on." And then we remembered, Dean specifically, Tom Owens, one of our story artists, was joking around because so many Vikings carry battle damage, and he said, they loved that the Vikings thought it was like cool, like you're waiting for your first like big scar and stuff like that. And Tom said, "Oh, we had this gag that we made for the film where Hiccup would wake up and he was missing one of his legs after a battle, and there was this moment, and then he'd go, oh, cool," and he was so excited. And Dean remembered that, and in the meeting, Dean said, "Well, maybe we should do the thing that Tom was talking about. Maybe we should have him lose one of his limbs." So we did that, And we were nervous about it. We went to our first big screening with a fresh, just recruited audience, and we were concerned about that because we felt very fondly about it, what it did for the movie. And it was actually Steven Spielberg who suggested that when Hiccup Wake Up, he saw a version where Toothless wasn't in the room with him when he woke up. And Hiccup came out and he was surprised to see Vikings and dragons and they're all getting along and Toothless was there. And Steven Spielberg said, I think when he wakes up, that's the only thing that should be in the room with him is Toothless. And then he'll freak out and go, oh my gosh, and that's exactly what we did because it was a great idea. We went to this test screening, and the interesting thing was that the audience sensed that that was vulnerable, and with no prompting, because it's the least fun thing, I think, in the process, because you go to a test screening, you are compelled to sit and watch the audience watch your movie. Afterwards, they break it down to a smaller focus group, and there's a man in the front who's there pretty much to just make trouble for you. And you can't say anything, so you're back there just like, and he'll say, so is anybody confused by anything? Anything that you didn't like? And so he's just, trying to start fires. But he said, did everybody like this film? And the first person that raised their hand was a little kid. And he said, don't change the light thing. Like, unprompted. And then a bunch of other people raised their hands and they jumped in right behind him and said, yeah, don't change that. That's the best part of the movie. So they sensed that it was vulnerable and they came to its rescue. It was really neat.
Kids will solve everything. They just love it. It's so amazing. I have to ask about, one of the greatest parts about the movie is the music. The score just like pulsates within every scene, but you have had great relationships with a lot of your films and music and the way they play out. And I wanted you to talk about how that was integral to the movie and the process.
Yeah, so Dean and I learned a bunch on Lilo and Stitch. That was the first movie that we both wrote and directed together. And we both had this interesting experience where we were showing Alan Silvestri, who was the composer on Lilo and Stitch, we were showing him our story reel, and afterwards he said, I totally understand, I get the whole thing, but then he said, like, there's one thing I didn't get, though. I didn't see the actual moment where Stitch went from bad to good, because the whole idea is that it's a villain that we redeem, and a villain becomes a hero in that story. And both Tina and I think we just got caught, because we were like, and we sort of looked at each other and went, and we didn't realize we never put it on screen, but we said, like, we didn't know exactly how to say it, because the dialogue for that would have been very, very awkward. And we did attempt it. We always drove through that part of the script, but no one ever felt like they could like put the words to that moment. And so we both said, we didn't know how to say it, so we left it off screen. And Alan said, put it on screen and I'll say it. And like this, the dawn of realization broke across my brow and I realized, oh yeah, music is not just there to like reinforce emotions, it can be a storytelling element. And the next thing that happened was when we went to the actual scoring session, I was kicking myself because these beautiful themes would kick in during certain parts of the movie, and you could hear the orchestra like duck down, because here comes a piece of dialogue. And they would duck down under the dialogue and then the music would come back up, and it happened several times, and I realized that we had both left some clutter in the way of some of the music. So we vowed that that wouldn't happen again. So from that point on, both Dean and I would build what we would call like houses for music inside our films. The most notable one being in How to Train Your Dragon, that whole thing in the cove, which we took a lot of inspiration from The Black Stallion, and that beautiful sequence with the boy and the horse. And so John knew that that was going to be all him. And he waited until the very end to do that particular piece of music, because he admitted later that it was daunting, knowing how important that one section was going to be. But we handed it to him, and he did this amazing thing, and he found like these really cool things that, as instruments, like stones and things, that'd be like banging on stones to get some of that really unique sound in there. But sometimes, and I'm just such a believer in music being like the biggest voice of the film, and finding places where it can take the stage, because I just feel it's unassailable in a way. I don't think you can accidentally make music funny. Like, you can do a line and it might be inadvertently funny and you ruin a moment. but not with music. I just feel very safe with it.
In case you guys know, DreamWorks is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. And Chris is celebrating his 30th birthday. So, it's awesome. He was born in the studio. How does this prepare you for this indie film that you made this year called The Wild Robot? How does Train Your Dragon get you ready to make what I think is, again, one of DreamWorks' greatest bangers yet?
Oh, thank you. The stuff I was talking about before, like getting serious about structure before you get distracted with some of the more fun stuff, really came in handy because it's an adaptation. Peter Brown wrote this amazing, wonderful book that is so beloved, and translating that to the screen, I used all of the things I learned on Mulan and How to Train Your Dragon, specifically about like just getting serious about making structural shifts so that you can get those themes onto screen without being distracted. And of course, certainly the whole thing with music. In this case, Chris Bowers, who did the score, he came on pretty early and understood that a lot of this movie was going to be handled by him. He was going to be carrying some of the bigger parts of the movie. So he got started early, creating themes and finding the themes and stuff like that. And we would visit with him like pretty much once a week and twice a week, as we neared the end. And he had a studio that was not too far away, so we would just drive over there in the morning. It was the best way to start the day, is sit with Chris and listen to him sketch all these themes and just see what he did. And then we come from that and go directly to the studio and get back to work on the narrative.
The final question, and again, like How to Train Your Dragon is just one of the greats. I think you should definitely make a second or a third one after. If you want, you can tell us what it could be about and everything. But you're in a room full of SCAD students. You can clap if you're a SCAD student. As I asked it, I instantly regretted it because I knew it was going to get really loud at that moment. Thank you for proving me right. But you're in a room of people who are artists, whether in animation, filmmaking, TV, they want to be able to express themselves through art. You are living the dream. You're doing what they want. They want to be like you when they grow up. I want to be like you when I grow up. So, what's a piece of advice you have for them to get to the place where they're making How to Train Your Dragon, and then 14 years later, get a theater filled to the max like they haven't seen it before? But I did say it was world premiere, so we were on that page. But what's your piece of advice for them to make it in this, or just to stay with it?
Yeah, I mean, working in animation is amazing because there's so many artists that are so much better at everything than you do. I can't do so many things, and if I'm ever feeling like uninspired, I can just walk down the hall to like Ramon Zivak's room and see what he's up to, or to Richie's room, or into some of the story artists' rooms and just see what they're up to. I would say, like, I was having a conversation with Jeffrey Katzenberg actually one day, and I was talking about that, like, follow your dreams and all the stuff that you're told as a kid, and he cut me off and he said, now, follow your talent. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, because if my dream was to ice skate really well, that's not going to work out. But I have a talent for, I think, story, perhaps, and I seem to be able to do that. So so as you get into the whole thing, like, follow your talent, and the other thing I'd say is all things go back to story. All roads go back to story, no matter what it is, no matter what discipline, lighting or animation or modeling or design, all goes back to story. When Dean and I started writing and directing, Dean started in layout, and I immediately identified him as having a great story sense, and so I advocated for him to like move from layout into the story department on Mulan, where he was amazing, and it was exactly where he was supposed to be. So when we wrote and directed for the first time on Lilo and Stitch, there was a moment of like, well, how can I do this? Because I'm not I trained in animation, but I'm not like amazing at it. So I can't animate, I don't have the camera and dimension inside, animated film, and I can't do layout. And I know color pretty well, but I don't think I would feel comfortable telling somebody how to do their paintings and stuff. And we both determined we won't do any of that. We'll stay where we belong. I'll stay in story, and I will direct from there. Meaning, if I talk to an actor, and I do it to this day, if I talk to an actor, or if I'm talking to an animator, or a layout artist, I just talk about what the story needs at that particular moment, and I let them solve the problem. And I always have an image in my head as to what I think the scene should look like, but inevitably, the animator is not going to do that. They're going to do their thing. And we both determined, if it's not what we thought it was going to be, but if it checks all the boxes, we're done, and we move on, and we don't belabor it. So I'd say all things go back to story and follow your talent are my two main things I would say.
I lied. I do have one question I have to ask because I know that people are in the room that want to know. So there's this rumor going around that there's going to be like a live action remake or something of this, and I just want to know what you will, won't, or can't tell us about it.
Well, Dean is directing it, so I think I've seen it. I have seen it.
What is it about?
It's a lot like that movie we just saw. It's really, I think that like them approaching Dean to direct it when he's so familiar with it is a great idea, because I mean there were certainly shortcomings. There are things you can't do in certain mediums, and so like to have the freedom to do a little bit more dimensional stuff and to dig into the characters a little bit more was pretty cool. And because he's got it, he knows how it works. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Listen, you're good at this. I think you're really good at this. I think you should continue to make more movies, as much as you want. Ladies and gentlemen, before we part, you can see him one more time tomorrow because he's on my Pixels and Pencils panel. So you get to hear him talk about Wild Robots. So come by tomorrow to this very room with a bunch of other animators. But thank you to President Wallace. Thank you to Savannah Film Festival. And one more time, ladies and gentlemen, get rowdy.